Cool. Well, I'm Chirag Shah, and I'm presenting with Reza here. What we're going to do is present on three mental models to make better product decisions. And before I get started, just a big shout out and thank you to all our sponsors and supporters. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do this. So another thanks to them. Um, so very quick background and introduction about myself and Reza. I'm a senior product manager at Realtor. And Reza, do you want to introduce yourself? I want to
Sure.
do yourself injustice.
Yeah. Do you want to flip to the slide, the about move? Are you moving the slides?
Oh yeah, sorry. Let's see.
Um, there we go. So yeah, so folks, I'm a senior product manager at SolarWinds. I work on our machine learning platform over there, and I also have a website called Awesome Voice of Product, where I interview current and future product leaders and share their experience and insights with the community. You can find that at austinbop.com. All right. I'll start over here about why PMs need mental models. So go ahead, Chirag. So I think we all realize that the job of a product manager is actually really hard. We make decisions every day, and all those decisions are sometimes very tactical that are short term, and sometimes they're long-term decisions that affect the whole success of that product or business. Mental models are really a way for you to help improve your decision making. It's difficult in the moment when you're making a decision to know what effect it could have. And so a mental model can give you some clarity in doing that. And they're frameworks that help you be more strategic. It helps you be more persuasive when you're working with stakeholders and help you influence folks, because what we do is really leadership through influence, and having a helpful framework, which we're actually pretty used to doing, helps us do our job better. And then the last thing is that it helps you be consistent in what you're doing. I think that's like one of the key things that you're trying to do as a product manager is you're trying to build trust with your team, and being consistent and reliable is a way to build that trust and improve that collaboration that you have with folks you work with.
All right, so kind of getting into the meat here. The first mental model that we wanted to share with y'all was the concept of path dependency. And by definition, what this essentially means that your set of decisions in the present is constrained essentially by the decisions that you may have made in the past. And so to put it simply, you might be required to commit to a less than optimal decision or path just due to a core decision that you made at the beginning. And so what that does is essentially reduce your options and make it difficult to shift. And where you see this most commonly is actually in the governmental institutional context. And so you could see this in our tax institutions, our welfare institutions, and so forth. So making assumptions at a time, say decades ago, that now are having effects on just the general population today. But a very simple way of defending that or against path dependency is ensuring that you're outlining all your decisions and making decisions that are somewhat reversible. And so kind of thinking through all the implications and consequences of the decision that you're making today and how they may affect your decisions in the future. And so with that, I think the most simple way to put it is that you want to preserve optionality. And the way of doing that, again, is by outlining. So I guess to actually illustrate this, Reza and I have two very basic examples that we can share with you. So the first one I'll share is actually related to the keyboard, which we're all very familiar with at this point. But essentially, and kind of I'll give you all like a very brief history of this from the resources I've actually read. But the typewriter itself was invented by Christopher Sholes, and so in the process of kind of inventing the typewriter, he actually went upon kind of deducting what a good keyboard or typeset could look like. And so the initial assumption was basically there'd be two rows, and the first row would be the top of the alphabet, or the first half of the alphabet, and the second would be the second half of the alphabet. But as he started to type, what he realized was if he was typing too fast, it would lead to a number of key jams. And that was just due to the actual makeup or the construction of the keyboard or the typewriter at the time. So of course they were made of metal kind of materials. So making or kind of quickly typing would lead to essentially a big jam overall. And so ultimately he came to the conclusion that certain letters should be closer together to make it more efficient in the typewriting context. So as you can see, like certain letters you might type together very quickly. But he himself even had the intention of actually optimizing the keyboard over time, but he just generally couldn't, as the keyboard itself, the typewriter, was purchased by Remington typewriting company. So in that process, he realized it was suboptimal. However, he couldn't actually change the decision as he sold the rights to the typewriter. And since then, what researchers have uncovered is that we kind of underutilize certain aspects of the keyboard in a way. So we actually have three rows. The middle row, where our fingers naturally rest, don't have the most use. So you kind of see that we type on the top and bottom rows most, but we rest naturally in the middle. And then lastly, we spend a lot of time typing with our left hand, just due to kind of the density of the right letters in that regard. So as you can see, like a decision made decades ago, it's kind of we live with day to day, and we don't really truly realize the effect of it because we become better typers. However, there is a better way. So I'll actually I'll hand it off to Reza to talk through like a more product-oriented example.
So before I do this, I'm going to share my example, and we like people to participate. So if you have an example that you'd like to share after I'm done with mine, I'd love to hear from one or two of you to share what examples you think would be relevant. So the one I'd like to share, sort of from the job that I'm at now, SolarWinds, builds monitoring software for IT infrastructure, and a lot of the software that we build is on-premise software. And so we're in the process of, replacing one of these on-premise software products with a SaaS version. But the way that we're doing it is that we're lifting and shifting, as in we're picking up the stuff that was on-prem and we're shifting it onto the SaaS product. And what happens with that is that when you do that, you lift and shift all the mistakes that you've made in the past, all the constraints and choices that you've made in that old product that might make it difficult for that new product to succeed in the market or have success with customers. But there's a trade-off there, as in there was speed versus redoing a complete new product. So I think that's the choice that was made there is irreversible, like the point that Chirag made. Another way of thinking about it, if some of you folks might have read about Amazon, they talk about one-way door and two-way door decisions, as in when they're trying to make a decision, they think about it as a one-way door or a two-way door, as in if it's if you make a two-way door decision, you can go in and you can come back out, as in it is reversible. But if it's a one-way decision, then you just go in and you can't come back out. So they try to think of decisions that way, as in, can this decision, like, is this decision so weighty that we need to have a way out? Like, if we go down this path, we need to be able to come out. But if it's a lightweight thing and it's not a big deal, having a one-way door decision allows you to sort of just make it quick and go forward and not worry about the consequences of it. So that's you come across these decisions as a product manager. Is the decision that I'm making going to be such a big decision, and should I allow it to be, reversible, and then think of the consequences of it? So I'll pause over here. I see a couple people, in the chat, at least one person in the chat mentioned that a choice of a technology platform could be a huge constraint. It's not easy to swivel from. So if there's any one or two folks that'd like to jump in and talk about path dependency that you might have come across in working in product, we'd love to hear from you.
I'll just throw one in. I had an occasion where I needed to price a product, and the traditional pricing model that was established long ago was based on sockets, and it didn't really fit for the product model I needed. And the challenge was, not only was my own organization very resistant to change, but we sell through ISVs who are very used to that kind of model. So it basically took about 2 years to kind of shift it. And I did it by providing an alternative that used a different pricing model, and we slowly kind of got a little more flexibility. We're still stuck with the socket-based pricing, but at least we have an alternative we can use when it's appropriate.
That's a great example, Jay. I think pricing oftentimes becomes this, it clearly is a big weighty decision, and the choice that you make puts you on a particular path that might be hard to reverse out of. So that's a good one. Anyone else? A quick one before we move on to the next mental model. Okay, we'll move on. Chirag,
Cool.
back to you.
Yeah. Alrighty. So the next one is actually a pretty ancient model in terms of like how it has come to fruition, but we call this first principles, and it's pretty common in the scientific and philosophical realm. What essentially it means is thinking bottom up in making decisions, and clearly outlining the self-evident assumptions. So laying out the facts and the bare bones that will help you kind of to think or reason from the actual reality of the situation. And so, as I said, the way to actually start with first principles is starting with the foundation of a problem, and kind of laying out what's true, what's definitely not true, and by that, what you can think of is what's true in reality, and these are basically things that you cannot be deduced further. And so you're starting with the essentials, and what this does as well is kind of cuts away at the dogma of a certain situation. So it might be that like a certain opinion or perspective is weighing on the situation, but as you kind of clear away and cut to the truth of it, you realize that there's opinion, but there's also truth. And so, well, from a like philosophical perspective, the way you can think of it as kind of embracing things as the way they are, rather than conflating them with, again, opinion and so forth. So, as I said, this is mostly utilized in the scientific philosophical arena. Aristotle was a big fan of this, and so was Socrates. And so actually the application of it is just the Socratic questioning path. And so I'm sure we're all familiar with the variety of ways that we solve problems. And this is just a more like a tried and true method of really solving a problem from the actual reality of the situation. So in terms of Socratic questioning, just as a reminder of what it is, what you want to do is kind of ask questions of, and really it's very introspective in the sense of starting with, why do I think a certain way? What exactly do I think? How do I know something's true? And actually comparing what you think is true to the opposite and thinking alternatively, and almost acting as your own devil's advocate, and then searching for evidence, thinking about another person's perspective, and then actually thinking through like, what if I'm wrong? What are the consequences if I'm wrong? And then getting into like, why do I think that way? Am I correct? And then getting into the conclusions themselves. And then kind of, and I think we've all touched on this at some point, is the 5 whys, just asking yourself why literally 5 times to get to like the core of the issue. And one thing I wanted to also include here is the idea of limiting beliefs in kind of outlining first principles. So what occurs a lot is we make excuses regarding like, we might not know enough, so we might want to just begin moving fast and learning, which I think is a great bias to have as a product manager. However, we could simply start by trying to ask ourselves those questions, and then secondarily thinking about the fact that there might be too many first principles, that the reality of the situation is too big. So I think kind of starting to kind of reduce the amount of like convenient narratives that could reduce your curiosity and discovery will lead you to at least a few principles that will allow you to begin thinking a bit more broadly towards solving a specific problem. So I'll actually hand this back off to Reza to walk through another product example. Oh, I think you're muted, Reza.
Yeah, thank you, Chirag.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll share an example, and then I'll look to you guys to share from your experience. My example, I'll share an example and a sort of another thought around it. The example that I will use is one that's I think we're all familiar with, which is the iPhone, which I have no idea how they actually went about thinking on how to, build that product. But they clearly, really questioned the idea of what a phone is and whether it needed a keyboard, and completely transformed the way that we thought about how we would use this little phone that's more like a computer now in our hands. I think the other point that I want to make is where you as a product manager, what helps you with first principles, in asking why and challenging beliefs and assumptions, is that we find it very easy to have our own opinions. We believe that we need to have our own opinions be matter to what we're building, but what really is important about this mental model is that we need to support it by actually talking to customers, because that challenges our beliefs about what is important to the problem that we're solving, and understanding it well enough to where as we ask why, we know that we're getting to the root of what problem that we're trying to solve. So I'm looking at the chat to see about some comments. Someone wrote about 5 whys. Yes, we did talk about that.
Yeah, there was a question from Haley in there that I sent to you.
She loves the idea of first principles, but is curious about ways to frame the exercise as to mitigate negative feedback and arguments, perhaps just to focus on socializing.
For a little more context, I posted another question right after that was basically like, how do you mitigate for bias, as Christina was talking about, and making sure that you're digging into, the right questions, making the right, putting the right facts down that are actually useful. And my gut is that you just have to have, as you mentioned, a really, really solid understanding of the environment that you're operating in, your customers, your capabilities as a team, that sort of thing. Because there can be disagreements, about what the facts are, right? So that was sort of my first question. And then my second one was like, making sure that you're putting down the right assumptions.
Yes, I completely agree. Couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it's difficult to pull yourself out of, your opinion and think through the problem well enough. I think that's one of the key things about this is like how you frame the problem or how you frame the conversation is critical to sort of how you get through talking about it. Chirag, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think, and I think you mentioned this in your question itself, is having the right evidence, and to adding to Reza's point of framing, speaking to the audience with the right evidence. So like you might have qualitative evidence if you're speaking to a specific partner in like your day to day, or you may have quantitative research that also speaks to a similar truth. However, I think there are a number of types of evidence you can share based on who you're talking to, which may resonate better with that person.
Thank you guys, I appreciate it.
Chirag, there was another question from Monica about when would you use path dependency versus first principles?
Yeah, so actually, as I was speaking through first principles, path dependency to an extent is part of it when you think about it, because I think in Socratic questioning, what you're trying to do is also examine consequences and implications, which is very similar to path dependency. So I would say actually that first principles should precede path dependency. And so there's also a nuance in a lot of these models. There are a number of models, and we'll share some resources that that will lead you to learn more about the tens and almost hundreds of them. But first principles is really one of the core models. And so a lot of the mental models, such as path dependency, kind of blend into it. If you start there, you should be able to unravel like the dependencies that you may be having to resolve in the future. So I don't know if that answered your question, like how you can separate it. But if I was to start with one of these two models, I would start with first principles.
That's a great answer.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, Chirag.
Cool. Yeah, go to the next one.
Yeah.
Cool. So the next one here is fundamental attribution error, or I know that's a mouthful. So in a lot of psychological circles, they just call this FAE. But essentially, it is falsely kind of attributing a problem or a situation or outcome to a person's character or personality rather than the situation itself. So focusing on the person rather than the position that person's in the situation that the person's in. So kind of elaborating on that, as I mentioned, we're kind of thinking through the personality, the character, who is that person, blaming that specific person. And then in the inverse, when we think about our own wins or losses, we more so have a bias of first starting with not ourselves, but with the environment and how things in the environment were not right, or the situation itself wasn't optimal, so we didn't actually get to the outcome that we expected. And so, as I mentioned, this is more of a psychological bias, and so as like as another nuance or sidebar, mental models are not only like psychological biases, they're logical fallacies, and they're models that are essentially frameworks from other industries. So this is actually a kind of a psychological bias overall. And so kind of a way of defending against fundamental attribution error is withholding judgment. And that can be really hard to do as people, in that we instinctively want to find out the cause or the reason for a specific outcome, just so that we can begin problem solving against that cause, or share that this was the cause of that specific outcome. However, in this specific like realm here, by withholding judgment, you might be better off by just due to the fact that you're able to examine more, you're able to think more broadly, because you take a pause in that moment of time, And so in that, you should be analyzing the context of the situation, thinking about what other factors could have caused it. And then when it comes to other people, and we speak about this very frequently as product people, having empathy for not only our users, but also our partners, and our even stakeholders and so forth. Like what's causing them to make these decisions, to make these claims. And so by withholding that judgment, you're able to think much bigger about a situation rather than just impulsively about that specific moment in time. And so as like a very basic example, and I'm sure that we all have experienced it at some point, I wanted to share one, like the getting getting cut off in traffic as an example, in that you don't really know what's happening in that car. I think we all, and I've come to like, I actually just saw this the other day, wherein somebody was cut off, and they were stuck in traffic, and the person that was cut off actually stopped, came out of the car, talked to the person, and yelled at them, and without really knowing why that person cut them off. And I think that we immediately, in those situations of getting cut off, we think of like malicious intent, or we think that person's a bad driver. However, we don't know if there could have been a screaming baby in the car. That person literally did not see you, and there was no reason why they cut you off. But we still blame that person. And to kind of build on this, I'll pass it back to Reza for a more product-related example.
I think like Chirag touched on, the challenge around this you can encounter is with your stakeholders. So a very common example that you might encounter is, you know, if your engineering team is going slow, or they don't work as fast as they did in the place that you were in before, and you come in and you're like, man, these engineers suck. And you know, what you're maybe not understanding, or if a particular engineer, not maybe a team, you might not understand that, you know, they work in an environment that doesn't allow them to succeed, or that particular engineer doesn't have the tools they need to go faster or do their work better, or they, you know, they're not accepted on the team in a way that would help them succeed. Say they're a woman engineer, and you know, they're working with a bunch of bros, and they can't, they're not accepted, and they can't be as productive as they would like to. And so really zooming out and thinking about the situation that that person is in and what's causing them to be the way they are is really critical as a product manager. Like I mentioned earlier, like you are collaborating with a wide range of people, and doing that in a way that builds trust and improves that collaboration is critical. So this is a really important mental model to think about as you work. Another one I think is really, another example that I can think of is it really applies to yourself as a product manager. Sometimes you might think that, you know, the success of your product only has to do with you, where it, you know, where, and you might sort of get a big head about it, or you might think it's, you know, like you're the CEO of the product, and so that's why the product has succeeded. And you might, you know, it might be many things. It could be because you work with a great team, or it just might be luck or good fortune. And so as a product manager, having humility for, you know, your success and why it was caused, and seeing the situation that helped you be successful is critical in being, you know, self-reflective on what you need to do and what you can do better, or what you're doing well, to continue to be a good product manager. So I'm going to look at questions to see if there are any questions on here. So one that I see, I see a comment, withholding judgment allows us to do divergent thinking first to expand and identify alternatives. Yes, absolutely, because you're bringing in sort of diversity of opinion in doing so. How might we minimize fundamental attribution error embedded in market segmentation and personas? Are there any exercises that apply the defenses you mentioned? Chirag, what do you think about that one?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I can't, so off the top of my head, I can't think of any specific exercises. Um, I think it goes back to getting to a point, like a certain threshold of, say, user research, like having enough data that best represents your persona. So if you're only talking to one or two people, that might not be the best set of data. But when it comes to well, when I think there's like two things here. One is in the moment when you're talking to somebody and gathering data, say qualitative data, um, try to do it in a neutral environment, wherein they're not necessarily like they're like they're not emotionally uh, stressed, or they're not like emotionally affected in that situation, and that can be hard to do as we're people. But think about putting them in the right position to give you the best feedback possible. And then second is having as much and this is like this is hard to say like what like to the number of interviews you should be having, but like 6 to 8 is typically a good rule of thumb. But I'd say like yeah, make sure that they're in the right mindset, like that specific person to help define your persona, and then get enough data under your belt so that you've kind of identified like the common trend and so forth. But I can't think of like a specific exercise or activity.
Yeah. Someone also mentioned in the chat that there is a circles method that can help you with this. I think, it sort of brings some more focus to understanding the problem and the user. So I recommend taking a look at that link in the chat. I'm also taking a look over here. Naveen is asking if you will share resources for further learning on mental models. Yes, we will.
Sure.
Just 2 more slides and we'll share that. You will have the link to the slides in the Slack as well. Someone mentioned comment, this happens when a person is working in the wrong environment or lacks the proper processes, tools, and systems. Yes, thank you, Hector. And someone called out and said, Hector, good call out. Alignment of org and architecture is critical. And Hector also commented, need to validate user and buyer persona through A/B testing using ideal customer versus wrong customer persona. Yes, that's a good comment as well. Any other questions or comments before we go and touch on takeaways and then on resources? Thank you everyone for jumping in with your comments and resources and questions. It's been great so far. Chirag, why don't we go to takeaways?
Yep.
And so, just so that you can, have something in your pocket when you wake up on Monday and go to work. So we'll start with the first one there, which is make decisions that can be painlessly reversed. So think about how you can do that. That's especially important when you're making a really weighty decision or when you're early in the process of building something or doing a feature. This gives you that flexibility. The next one on here is really take the time to outline the facts, the basics, the fundamentals of a situation or object before starting. So this requires that deep thinking that you need to do to really get past your biases, dig in, understand your user, understand the problem, use all that evidence outside of your own sort of soup in your brain to really get that better understanding before you begin something. And then the last one on here is just be mindful of the unseen influences that affects your behavior. So we are all biased, we're all human, we all make mistakes. And so examining your thinking is really important as you work as a product manager, and using this approach helps you make better decisions. So Chirag is going to share some resources that are helpful for thinking about these mental models. Chirag himself is an expert on this. He's been writing on it too. So that's why we're doing this today. But here's some great resources that you can talk about.
Thanks, Reza. I'm no expert.
Yeah, more so than many of us. You spend more time thinking about it.
I spend a lot of time thinking about it. Yeah. So actually, kind of walking through these resources. The one at the bottom here, Poor Charlie's Almanac, is probably the source of super thinking and great mental models. So Charlie Munger, if y'all aren't aware, is Warren Buffett's partner. He's kind of he's not a silent partner by any means, but he's not as public with his comments and actions. So, however, he is an equal partner of Buffett's, and so the way that he kind of thinks or proposes that we think is actually leveraging what he calls a lattice work of mental models. So he's a huge student of just a variety of subjects and people through time. And so what he's developed, not in this book, in addition to other topics in the same book, is that lattice work. And so he touches on topics, of course, in economics and politics, but also psychology, a number of things that he leverages to make investment decisions. And so based on that, Gabriel Weinberg, the founder of DuckDuckGo, and Shane Parrish, who writes at Farnham Street, have kind of taken that spirit and synthesized it and distilled it into kind of bite-sized chunks that people such as myself and y'all can leverage to learn more about mental models and so forth. And so Super Thinking is a great reference manual. Gabriel goes through kind of, I'd say like 70 or 80 models in 200 to 300 pages. And Shane writes kind of long form posts about these models. And he also has 2 volumes of books about the models. So I would definitely check out, if I was to say, if you're looking for like a synthesis and a distillation of that lattice work that I referenced that Munger has proposed, I'd start with Super Thinking, and you can definitely leverage it through time. And you'll notice that the first thing that Gabriel mentions is first principles. And even in the book, a lot of these, both Gabriel and Charlie are always kind of referencing like what makes them so effective, and it is these models. So yeah, we'll definitely share these links in the Slack channel. So yeah, I think that kind of wraps up everything. We wanted to thank you all for spending some time with us, and I hope this inspired y'all to continue just improving your day-to-day thinking.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Great questions, great participation. Super glad to see so many people out on a Saturday jumping on a Zoom for Product Camp. Great event.
Yeah.
So thanks to all the volunteers, the sponsors, the organizers for making this a great product event.